The day had started like any other for James, a soldier on a routine patrol in a hostile zone. He was used to the risks, the dangers, and the uncertainty of his mission. His job had always been to protect his team, to fight when necessary, and to survive the odds. But today things would take an unexpected turn. It was a hot, dusty afternoon when he heard the strange sound. It wasn't the usual growl of the enemy or the crackle of gunfire in the distance. This was something else entirely. A high-pitched, desperate sound echoed through the empty hills. James paused, his instincts kicking in. He scanned the horizon, his trained eyes searching for the source. It didn't take long for him to see it. There, on the other side of a rocky cliff, was something that should not have been there. A creature, alien without a doubt, was struggling, its young trapped beneath a pile of rubble. The creature was a towering figure covered in scales that shimmered in the sunlight, but it was the smaller one that caught James's attention. The young one was small, fragile, and trapped. Its cries rang out, pleading for help. The larger creature, a mother perhaps, was frantically trying to move the rubble, but it was clear that she was not strong enough on her own. James didn't hesitate. Without thinking, he sprinted towards them, his weapon still slung across his back. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was no fear, just a clear, focused purpose. He had seen death in many forms, but this was different. This wasn't a battle or a fight. This was a life in need of saving. The distance between him and the creatures shrank quickly, his boots kicking up dust with each step. As he got closer, he could see the alien mother's eyes, deep ancient eyes that looked filled with both fear and hope. It was a strange sight to see an alien species this vulnerable, but James didn't pause to question it. He knew what he had to do. Reaching the young one, he knelt down and immediately assessed the situation. The rubble was heavy but not impossible to move. He glanced back at the alien mother who had stopped her frantic efforts to watch him. Her gaze was sharp, but there was something else there, something James couldn't quite place. He didn't have time to wonder about it. With careful movements, James dug his hands into the rubble, moving the pieces one by one. The alien young one whimpered, its tiny form trembling with fear. But when James freed it, the young one didn't run. It just looked at him, its big eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and confusion. He reached out a hand to it, and to his surprise, the creature touched it gently, its tiny fingers brushing his. The alien mother, who had been watching silently, stepped closer. Her large form towered over James, but her eyes softened. There was a moment of quiet understanding between them. In that moment, James realized that he had not only saved the young one but had earned the respect of the alien mother as well. She didn't speak. How could she? James didn't know her language, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. There was gratitude there, but also something deeper, something that transcended words. She had been willing to sacrifice herself for her young, and now a human had stepped in to save them both. But as he stood up, brushing the dust from his uniform, James began to feel something stir inside him. The alien mother was still watching him, and it was clear that her thoughts were running deep. There was something unspoken in her gaze. As she turned and moved toward the edge of the rocks, James stood there, still holding the young one in his arms, unsure of what would happen next. The sound of the alien mother's voice, low and rumbling, broke the silence. It wasn't a language he could understand, but the tone made it clear that she was speaking to her young one. The small creature in his arms chirped softly, seemingly responding to its mother, but it didn't pull away. It was still holding onto him, its small fingers curled around his sleeve. James felt a strange sensation in his chest. He had always been a protector, whether it was his fellow soldiers or innocent civilians caught in conflict. But this was different. The bond between this alien mother and her young one was intense, a connection so strong that it seemed to echo in the air itself. He had interrupted that bond by saving her child, and in doing so, he had become part of their world, whether he realized it or not. As the alien mother stood tall, her presence commanding, she finally turned to face James directly. Her eyes were intense, her expression unreadable. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. She looked at him as though assessing him, trying to understand what kind of human could have so boldly intervened in a moment of need. And then, for a brief second, their eyes locked. James felt a strange pull, like an invisible force drawing them together. It wasn't romantic or even sexual. It was deeper, something primal. She had seen something in him, something that made her reconsider the world she thought she knew. A small part of him was curious about what this alien species truly thought of him and what had just happened. But before he could act on his thoughts, the alien mother made her decision. She stepped forward, lowering her head in a gesture that could only be interpreted as acknowledgement. In her own way, she was thanking him. And in that silent moment, James understood that his life had just changed forever. He had stepped into a world he had never known. And now, this alien queen, this strange, powerful creature, had declared him something more than just a passerby in their world. James had never expected his day to take such an unexpected turn. Just yesterday, he had been back at base, joking with his fellow soldiers and preparing for a routine mission. Today he had found himself in a strange and unfamiliar place, standing before an alien queen who seemed to be watching him closely. The bond he had formed with her young one had not only saved the creature's life, but had also left him in the strange position of being in the queen's favor. After saving the young one, James had stayed with the alien creature, trying to make sure it was all right. The small alien had not left his side since the rescue. Its bright eyes would occasionally glance up at him, its small hands tugging at his uniform, but the trust it had placed in him was clear. James was no expert in alien species, but he could feel that the little creature was not just grateful. It was forming a connection with him. The alien queen, on the other hand, remained silent. She had not spoken a word, yet her gaze lingered on James. It was as if she was studying him, trying to understand his actions and his motivations. Her silence was both heavy and thoughtful. James didn't know what to make of it, but he didn't question it either. There was no time to ask questions. His instincts told him to remain calm, to let the situation unfold naturally. The journey back to the Queen's domain was a quiet one. The alien creatures moved swiftly, their steps confident and purposeful, while James followed behind, still feeling like an outsider in this alien world. As they walked, the terrain began to change. The dry, rocky hills gave way to lush, vibrant forests and sparkling streams. The air became heavier with the scent of exotic flowers, and the sky overhead shifted into shades of purple and green. The world they were walking through was like nothing he had ever seen, a place full of life and mystery. Eventually, they arrived at a large, sprawling structure, more like a fortress than a home. It was built into the side of a massive cliff, its walls made of shimmering stone that seemed to glow in the fading light. The entrance was guarded by more of the alien creatures, tall and imposing, but they parted respectfully when the Queen approached. They all seemed to know her, and their respect for her was unquestionable. James could feel the weight of their eyes on him, but he didn't let it distract him. The young alien in his arms had stopped fidgeting, and now it was snuggled close to his chest, looking around with wide eyes. As he stepped into the Queen's domain, the atmosphere shifted. There was a sense of power here, a force that James could feel in his bones. The Queen's presence was overwhelming. Inside the fortress, the Queen led them to a large, open chamber. The walls were lined with intricate carvings, telling stories of battles, family, and history that James couldn't understand. It was a room full of ancient knowledge, and it felt like the walls themselves were alive with it. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and in the center of the room, a large stone pedestal stood. On it, there was an object that glowed, softly as if holding some sort of energy within it. The Queen turned to him, her eyes still watching closely. James felt her gaze pierce through him, studying him with an intensity that made him feel exposed. But there was no hostility in her eyes, just an unwavering sense of purpose. He had saved her child, but he was also in her territory now. He couldn't help but wonder what she expected from him. The alien mother approached the pedestal and gently placed her hand on the glowing object. The air hummed softly, and for a moment, everything seemed to slow down. James felt a strange pull toward the object as if it was calling to him. The Queen's eyes turned toward him, and without a word she motioned for him to come closer. James hesitated for just a second before walking toward her. The room seemed to grow warmer, and the soft hum of the object grew louder as he neared. He was not sure what the Queen wanted from him, but his instincts told him to trust her. As he reached the pedestal, the Queen extended her hand toward him. It was a simple gesture, but it carried so much meaning. He placed his hand in hers, and the moment their skin too. The days that followed were unlike anything James had ever experienced. The alien Queen, though still somewhat distant, began to show him more of her world. The fortress was just the beginning. There were hidden caves, vast jungles, and high peaks, all part of this alien kingdom that seemed as old as time itself. The Queen took him to places where he could see the true scale of her people's power. Ancient libraries filled with knowledge, great halls decorated with the stories of her ancestors, and a city that seemed to float in the sky, held up by nothing but the power of the earth beneath. James had always been someone who enjoyed learning, and this world was full of things he could never have imagined. He marveled at the technology, the architecture, and the history that stretched back thousands of years. But despite the beauty of everything around him, he couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. He had saved the Queen's young one. Yes, but there was still much about her people that was foreign to him. The Queen was patient, though. She never forced him to understand everything in one day. Instead, she guided him through her world slowly, piece by piece. Each time they walked together, she would show him something new. A strange plant that could heal wounds, a tree whose fruit could change the weather, a crystal that could harness the energy of the stars. It was as if every step he took brought him closer to understanding a world that was both beautiful and terrifying in its complexity. But it wasn't just the alien world that fascinated James, it was the Queen herself. He had never met anyone like her. Her strength was unmatched, her presence commanding. But there was also something vulnerable in her. Beneath the royal exterior, James could see the weight of her responsibilities. She carried the burden of an entire people on her shoulders, and he could sense the loneliness that came with that. Though she rarely spoke of it, there were times when James could see glimpses of what lay beneath the surface. A flicker of doubt in her eyes, a momentary hesitation when she made decisions. It was as if, despite her power, she was still searching for something she couldn't quite find. And in those moments, James began to realize that perhaps she wasn't as invincible as she seemed. Maybe, just maybe, she needed someone to stand beside her, someone who could help carry the weight of her world. The bond between them deepened in the days that followed. James was no longer just a protector of her young one. He had become an ally, someone she trusted to be by her side. They spoke more, though still in silence for the most part. The Queen would gesture for him to follow her, and he would comply, trying to understand her every move, every glance. It was clear that she was testing him, trying to see how far his loyalty would go. One evening, as they walked through the royal gardens, James noticed something different. The Queen was quieter than usual, her gaze distant as she looked out over the horizon. The sky was streaked with shades of red and gold, the setting sun casting long shadows across the land. It was a breathtaking sight, but there was something heavy in the air. It felt like the calm before a storm. "Is something wrong?" James asked, his voice breaking the silence. The Queen turned to him, her eyes locking onto his. For the first time since he had met her, she seemed uncertain. Her usual confidence was absent, replaced by a flicker of vulnerability. "There are those who do not trust you," she said quietly, her voice low, almost a whisper. "There are those who believe that your presence here, so close to me, is a threat. They do not see you as an ally, they see you as an intruder." James frowned, not fully understanding. He had saved her young one, and he had done everything he could to show that he meant no harm. But it seemed that not everyone shared the same view. "I didn't come here to hurt you or your people," James said, his voice firm. "I came because I wanted to help. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that." The Queen regarded him for a moment as if weighing his words. She didn't respond immediately, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, an understanding perhaps, or a recognition of his sincerity. "You are brave," she said at last, "and perhaps that is why I am not afraid of you. But there are others in my court who do not understand your bravery. They see only the risk." James felt a weight in his chest. He had known that his presence here wouldn't be welcomed by everyone, but hearing it from the Queen herself made it all the more real. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable, but despite the unease, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. He had come to care for her people, to respect the Queen, and to protect the young one. And he wasn't going to back down. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice strong. The Queen's lips curled into a faint smile. It was small, but it was there, and it meant something. "Then we have much to discuss," she said, turning back to the horizon. As they stood there side by side, James couldn't help but feel the weight of the Queen's words. There was more at play here than he had originally thought. It wasn't just about protecting the young one or earning the Queen's trust. It was about something bigger, something that would require all of his courage, his strength, and his determination. But as he looked at the Queen, standing tall and proud, he knew that he wasn't alone. She might carry the weight of her people on her shoulders, but he would stand beside her, ready to fight whatever battles came their way. The tension between James and the Queen's court had been building, but nothing could prepare him for what happened next. One evening, while they were walking through the royal gardens, the atmosphere shifted suddenly. The Queen's usual calm demeanor was replaced with an edge of urgency. Her pace quickened as she motioned for James to follow her. "There is something I need to show you," she said, her voice tight. "Something that cannot be ignored." James could sense the weight in her words. The usual serenity of the garden was gone, replaced by a feeling of foreboding. He had grown used to the Queen's presence, but now there was a palpable sense of danger in the air. The Queen led him to a hidden chamber deep inside the fortress, one James had never seen before. The room was filled with strange symbols and artifacts, each more fascinating than the last. But in the center of the room was a large stone, glowing faintly. The stone seemed to pulse with energy, its light shifting and changing as though it had a life of its own. "This is the Heartstone," the Queen said softly. "It holds the power of my ancestors, the strength of my people, but it has been weakening over the years. The balance is shifting, and if we do not act soon, we could lose everything." James looked at the Queen, his brow furrowed. He had seen her strength, her determination, but this was different. The Heartstone seemed to radiate an energy that both intrigued and frightened him. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice steady. The Queen met his gaze with a deep, solemn look. "I need your help, James. The Heartstone's power can only be fully restored if we unite the different factions of my people. But there are those who oppose this, those who fear change. They believe that I have strayed too far from tradition. They believe that the presence of a human, even one who has proven his loyalty, is too much of a risk." James understood immediately. It wasn't just about saving the young alien or protecting the Queen. It was about the future of her people. The Queen's leadership was being questioned, and if she couldn't unite her people, the Heartstone's power would continue to fade, taking her kingdom with it. "Then we need to show them that unity is the only way forward," James said, his voice resolute. The Queen nodded, though the weight of the situation was clearly heavy on her. "It won't be easy. There are those who will do anything to keep things the way they are, but we must try, or everything will be lost." And so began their quest to unite the factions. James worked alongside the Queen, traveling to different regions of the kingdom, meeting with leaders and influential figures. Some were more willing to listen than others, but each time, James was by the Queen's side, showing his loyalty and proving that he was not just a protector, but a part of their world now. There were close calls along the way. Some factions had no interest in change and would rather fight than compromise. But through every battle, both physical and political, James stayed steadfast. His loyalty to the Queen, to her people, and to the young one he had saved, kept him going. And with each victory, no matter how small, the Queen's confidence grew. One evening, after a particularly difficult negotiation, the Queen sat beside James, her expression thoughtful. "I never thought it would be like this," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I thought I could handle everything on my own. But now I see that I can't do it without you." James looked at her, surprised by her words. "You've never needed anyone, not in the way most people do," he said gently. "You've always carried the weight of your people, your world. But you don't have to do it alone." For the first time, the Queen seemed to relax, her shoulders easing, as if the weight of the world had lightened just a little. She smiled at him, a rare, genuine smile that made something stir deep within James. There was more to their bond than just mutual respect. It was something deeper, something unspoken. As the days passed, the tension within the kingdom began to shift. Slowly but surely, the factions began to see the Queen's vision, and they started to support her in ways James hadn't expected. The Queen's strength was undeniable. But now, the day of the final confrontation had arrived and the kingdom was on edge. The once divided factions had slowly begun to come together, but the largest and most powerful faction remained defiant. They had their own vision of the future, and they weren't willing to let go of it without a fight. James and the Queen stood before the assembled forces, the final battle looming. The tension in the air was thick, but there was also a sense of purpose. James could see it in the Queen's eyes, a fire he hadn't seen before. She wasn't just fighting for her people anymore. She was fighting for her future, for the future of everything she held dear. "We can do this," James said, his voice steady. He had been by her side through every challenge, every battle, and now, as they faced their greatest test, he could feel the strength in his bones. He wasn't just her protector anymore. He was her partner in this fight, and he was ready to stand beside her no matter what came next. The Queen nodded, her gaze unwavering. "We must. There is no turning back. Now." The battle was fierce. The opposition was well organized and determined, but James and the Queen had something they didn't: unity. The factions that had once been divided now fought together under the Queen's banner. James led the charge, his heart pounding with the adrenaline of battle, but he never lost sight of the Queen. She was right beside him, her strength and grace on full display as she led her people. The fight raged on for hours, but slowly the tide began to turn. The opposing faction, though strong, could not withstand the power of a united kingdom. One by one, their leaders began to surrender, realizing that their cause was lost. Finally, as the dust settled and the battle came to an end, James turned to see the Queen standing tall, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She had won, not just a battle, but a future for her people. "We did it," James said, his voice filled with awe. The Queen looked at him, her expression softer than it had ever been. "No, we did it together." And in that moment, James knew that everything had changed. He had started this journey as a soldier, a protector, but now he was something more. He was part of this world, part of this kingdom, and most importantly, part of the Queen's future. As the sun set on the battlefield, casting a golden light over the victorious kingdom, James stood by the Queen's side, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together.